Welcome back to the Silicon Bites News Roundup. Washington trims forces in NATO's frontline, member states causing concern in some quarters and signaling weakness and withdrawal in the face of a revanchist Russia. This broad geopolitical canvas unfolds as Moscow hammers Ukraine's grid and Kyiv strikes back deep and hard at Russia's fuel arteries. Drones stalk a base in Belgium thought to host US nukes. China's refiners blink on Russian oil, and Brussels looks for a way to keep Ukraine's accession process moving into the EU, whether Orbán tries to throw a spanner into the works or not. Is the US easing off Europe's frontline states? That's the question we ask in this episode. To kick things off, Romania confirmed the first cut of US troops on NATO's eastern flank, ending a rotation brigade spread across several countries and lowering numbers at the Mihail Kogălniceanu airbase to just 1,000. And of course, Romania has proved to be one of the staunchest allies of the US in Europe and a cornerstone of NATO. Ironic that they should be chosen for the first cuts. NATO says that posture shifts are not unusual and overall US presence remains historically high, but the timing amid Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the issuing of endless threats by Russian propagandists and talking heads has stirred alarm in some quarters of Europe. This is reported by Reuters. Defense News frames it as stopping a Europe-wide brigade rotation. 1,000 remain in Romania. This bland framing can't obscure the fact that it represents a dilution of the forces and capability in the region. Atlantic Council's quick takes calls it the first officially announced step of a pullback and urged Europeans to fill the gap. It should not be a surprise, though, given the incendiary speech that Pete Hegseth gave in Europe earlier in 2025 about the US's core priorities. Spoilers, it wasn't Europe. This isn't a full retreat, but it is a political signal. If Washington pivots towards the so-called home front and the Indo-Pacific region, Europe must surge to fill the deterrence gaps. NATO official insistence that this kind of change is nothing to be concerned about rings hollow. The alliance is in close coordination. Such adjustments are not unusual, so says an alliance spokesperson via Reuters, but this ignores entirely how this signal may be read in Moscow as a retreat from European defence. Well, following on the apparent bad news, we have some good news. London tops up Storm Shadows, but Washington says no Tomahawks for now. The UK transferred an undisclosed number of Storm Shadow cruise missiles ahead of winter, as per Bloomberg reporting carried by the Kyiv Independent. Meanwhile, asked if he'd send Tomahawks, President Trump flip-flopped once again, saying no, not really. Things can change, reported November 2nd via the Kyiv Independent. Rather than strategic ambiguity, what Trump here seems to be signaling is simply the lack of a strategy. Storm Shadows keep Ukraine's deep strike capability alive, once more signaling boldness from one ally, while the US signals weakness and possibly even indifference. Politically, the denial of Tomahawks will be read by Moscow as a win rather than a neutral action on the part of the US. The Kremlin will seek to leverage this apparent division within the approaches of the different allies, US and UK. Next, we turn to the Pokrovsk crucible, high stakes attrition. Russia claims gains in the ruins of Pokrovsk. Ukraine says that special operations units are holding the line and blocking a key Russian supply attempt north of the city. Verification of this is unclear. Reporting is mixed. Some paint a very dramatic picture of a landing by Ukrainian helicopters to bring in special troops. It's clear that some city blocks are changing hands and that it's not all going in Russia's favor. That's Reuters reporting. If Pokrovsk falls, however, Russia unlocks a logistics gate towards the Dnipro edge of the Donetsk region. If Ukraine holds, Russia bleeds battalion-sized assault groups for marginal progress, for tiny gains. It raises the question about whether the casualty burn rate is at all sustainable for Moscow. Next, we turn to sanctions biting and drones burning. China's refiners blink on Russian oil. State giants Sinopec and PetroChina reportedly cancelled some Russian cargoes after US and UK sanctions on Russia's oil majors. Smaller teapot refiners are also apparently pausing purchases. That's Bloomberg via Kyiv Independent. It suggests that compliance risk versus barrel discounts are starting to make less and less sense. Sanctions enforcement is finally altering trade behavior, not just changes in prices or spawning new methods on how to avoid sanctions. The EU's 19th package also tightens the noose on energy and the shadow fleet. Russia can, of course, reroute and disguise the source of barrels of crude. It can continue to engineer mid-ocean risky fuel transfers. But if top Chinese refiners step back, Moscow's revenues will inevitably shrink, and so do its budget options for the war and keeping its war economy afloat. Well, to add to Moscow's problems, there are now more fires on this home front. The Saratov refinery has been hit again. Ukraine struck the Saratov refinery for the third time this autumn, as per Ukraine's general staff, citing OSINT via Astra. Reduced throughput is expected and a regional diesel squeeze. Again, Kyiv Independent reporting. Well, the hybrid war on NATO soil also seems to be hotting up. Drones are spotted over Belgian's nuclear shared base, where apparently US munitions are stored. For several nights, unidentified drones probed the Kleinbrogel airbase, widely believed to host US nuclear bombs, and Belgian's F-16 and F-35 Air Force. The defense minister called it likely espionage. Interceptors couldn't apparently neutralize them. That's according to AP News. They come to spy to see where the F-16s are and where the ammunition is, said Theo Fraken via the Kyiv Independent. Well, I find it shocking that months after the first Russian drone incursions were reported, that Europe does not seem to have a solution to protect its expensive military assets and the scarce equipment that forms the first line of defense and deterrence against Moscow's aggression. While there is more of this hybrid war theatre, and this time the theatre is unfolding in the Baltics. A Wagner flag flutters near Estonia. A Russian Coast Guard boat displaying a Wagner flag was spotted near Estonia. Tallinn calls it more proof of a fracturing deterrence line, the so-called Iron System. Symbolic trolling from Moscow combined with intimidation is what this seems to be, says Kyiv Independent. Well, whether it is rogue or choreographed, the message is the same: a normalization of aggressive signaling behavior, testing reactions and pushing nerves to the very edge, keeping close neighbours off balance. Sanctions and maritime policing must tighten in the Baltic and the Gulf of Finland in reaction. And Europe does have one answer for this, at least, and that is to keep Ukraine's EU path moving forward despite attempts by Budapest to disrupt it. The mood in Brussels on the eve of the annual enlargement review on November 4th. The European Commission is pushing to keep technical accession work going, even if Hungary blocks formal steps, aiming to sustain momentum with a political signal. That's the quote from the Kyiv Independent. We need a way to keep a credible process running so that we are not losing Ukraine to Russia, said Commissioner Marta Kos. Well, let's turn to Russia and the economic front. Expropriation reality check. Mazda loses the asset buyback rights. Mazda became the first automaker to lose the right to reclaim Russian assets after its exit. Partners say that no proposal is on the table and the plant that it had there has been repurposed. This is a sign that asset security in Russia keeps deteriorating, says Kyiv Independent. Of course, it applies to foreign assets and has done since 2022, but it also seems to apply now to domestic businesses and their assets as well. Before we wrap up this news roundup, here are two stories to watch out for. Quick news hits to watch in case they bloom into larger developing stories. Well, one is the Crimea Bridge has banned EVs and hybrids until further notice, citing bomb-in-battery fears, and it is a sign, of course, of deep security jitters and paranoia. Perhaps in this case, the paranoia may be justified. That was being reported by the New Voice of Ukraine publication. And of course, we've also been talking about the EU's 19th package of sanctions. This is a wave of sanctions, especially squeezing the shadow fleet. London, Washington, and the EU have targeted oil majors. Pressure shifts from symbolism to imposing real supply chain costs on Russia, and there does seem to be some progress in this. Although whether this is done consistently and with serious intent will very much define how successful this policy is in degrading the Russian war machine.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!